Welcome, everyone. Dr. Morse, thank you for tuning in. This is episode number 27, where we're going to talk about different ways to fix your diet. Now, I took a 1-week hiatus, a little bit of traveling chaos, and I'm going to switch back from doing a lot of sports medicine, which is my primary job, to doing a lot more discussing medicine that is impacted by what we eat, different types of ways to clean up our diet, things to avoid, things to target, as well as functional medicine, anti-aging. I have a lot of cool stuff on tap coming up over the next 6 weeks or so. The trickiest part about the American diet is that it was heavily and continues to be heavily influenced by the wrong people. And that's part of the reason why we have a 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese. That is astronomical. 50% of teenagers are already obese. The stats continue to accumulate, and it's getting ugly and scary. That's why a drug like Ozempic or Mounjaro is becoming so popular, because they're looking at it as an easy way to lose the weight instead of doing what is actually necessary in fixing the diet. Now, when I say diet, a lot of people think, well, he wants me on this, and this every day. I don't want you to think about diet in that manner. Think about diet as what you put in your body, what food choices you make, whether you decide to eat at home or eat out, whether you are meal prepping. Some of this correlates with cost, unfortunately. And as we've seen, groceries have become ridiculously expensive. It is very, very difficult to eat healthy and to eat and to be able to have enough money to pay for groceries. And so you end up having to pick your poison, I call it. Now, when you do your grocery shopping, whether it's you or your loved one or whoever it is, there is a little known secret that a lot of people will follow that ends up keeping them out of a lot of trouble. When you enter the grocery store, and almost everyone is organized like this, you only pretty much want to shop on the outside aisles of the store. That's usually where the produce is. That's usually where the frozen section is. That's usually where the milk and dairy and meats are. If you go into the aisles, that's where all the processed foods are. Look at the back of the label. You probably can't even understand 95% of what's on that label. If you can't fully understand it, should you be eating it? It's a very good question, and one that I probably agree with. Now, I'm going to start this video with a very important one that for some people, they don't really take it into consideration. This is 5 easy ways to fix your diet. And number 1 is limit eating out. The problem with eating out, besides the fact that it's very expensive or can be very expensive, is that you cannot control the food quality. You can't say, hey, I want you to cook it in a seed oil free, I want you to have it antibiotic free. I want low pesticides. You don't have that luxury. Wherever the food came from, however it's processed, that's how you get it. And you may like it the palate wise, but your body has no idea what to do with it. And this is causing a massive spike in high blood pressure and diabetes and joint pain and inflammation throughout the body. So do your best to limit how often you eat out. I personally set a goal of once a week, not 1 day a week, but 1 meal a week, or usually a nice meal with my wife. Some people choose to go out every day or multiple times a day. Unless you are someone who's constantly traveling, it's very hard to be in one place at once. That's going to be very difficult to control all of the fluff and all of the poor things that are put in the food to make them taste better. The goal of the big food industry is to make things taste better and cheaper, but also more addictive. So they're no longer keeping us full or satiety. So you just keep eating and eating. If you have a choice, you can skip seed oils, and I'll talk about that in a minute, skip gluten, and skip preservatives and pesticides, and you're going to have a significant reduction in overall how you feel, overall how you look, and your disease processes in your body are going to be much happier. Many of these foods that we see that look and taste great are awful for you, and you know they're awful for you, but yet we continue to give in. Willpower is a huge part of this. It takes about 21 days to reset a trait that you do. Stick with it for 21 days and you'll be amazed at how easy it is to forget what you used to do. The number 2 thing I can recommend the most is to increase your protein intake. Most people do not eat enough protein. And ideally, you're getting 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. Whether that's 3 times a day or 5 times a day, probably shouldn't be once a day, but if you are, you really have to load up in that meal. Now, the tricky part is most people are not just eating a source of protein by itself. That's usually part of it, but we're usually eating a lot of carbs, sometimes a lot of fats. Now, the protein is very filling. So if you were to eat the protein first, which is technically how you're supposed to do it, you're not going to want to eat a lot of the other stuff because it's so filling. Now, the best sources of protein, and the vegans and vegetarians are going to really struggle here because of the content of their protein, of the food source of their protein is very low. The lentils, these things are very, very low. They end up having to go to powders. They end up having to go to modified forms of food that have protein because their food sources are just so low in protein. So ideally, you're targeting meats, especially lean cuts like chicken, like turkey, that is lean turkey, and leaner cuts of beef. If you're buying ground beef, ideally 85%, probably even ideally 96/4% fat. Yes, that is the most expensive. It also doesn't taste like the rest of them because what you're used to tasting is the fat, and that is super dense in calories and ends up accumulating very quickly. If you also are willing to go outside your norm, you can get eggs, which are a fantastic source of protein, ideally farm raised, as well as bison, which is a very, very lean meat, a little challenging to buy. You have to kind of get used to it, but it's very, very lean. Now, you're trying to avoid meats such as pork, which is very fatty, which is although it tastes delicious and I personally love it, I know that it's really bad for me. It is the highest source of contamination in terms of pesticides, in terms of parasites, and many other abnormal processes that should not be in meat. And then you can find some of the beef that's really fatty. You're going to try to avoid that. Duck, although not very common, is very fatty. And then the other one that is a little controversial is fish. Now, most people think fish is perfect and it's super clean and has great other qualities to it. The problem is our fish source right now is not very clean. So we're having a lot of mercury inside of the fish. And you can't just say, hey, look at this fish. Oh, this one doesn't have any mercury in it. Unfortunately, there's no way to tell. So it becomes very challenging, especially if you're eating out at sushi. Oh, this is very clean. You may be eating rice that's filled with arsenic, and you may be eating fish that's filled with mercury. Those metals don't magically disappear from your body. That's part of what I do at my practice is I evaluate heavy metal and toxin poisoning. And when I look at heavy metals, I've seen people in their 20s, their early 20s, that have mercury levels in their tissue 75 times normal. And that may present with all different types of weird ways. And it's not something that traditional medicine is going to look for. And the reason why we're getting all this is almost always through fish. You can get it through makeup. You can get it through, other sources, but they're pretty low. The fish is unfortunately the really highest. So while it can be very healthy and very good for you, if you can avoid it, especially the farm raised or however they call it, you want natural and wild caught if possible. Now, if you eat raw sushi, you also have to consider, some of the things that aren't going to be cooked out and some of the bugs that come along for the ride. If you're choosing a meat, nowadays the majority of the meats are contaminated with antibiotics. I spoke with a farmer a couple years ago, and he said, do you know how they get that marbleization of the beef. He said, we make the cows sick, and they're put on chronic antibiotics, and that's how you get that beautiful, juicy marbleization. Think about that. The meat you're eating and why it tastes the way it tastes is because of all the different things that the cows were given, not naturally. And it's very difficult to find a traditional meat source through a regular store now. And if you do, they're really expensive because they use all these things to cheapen the food and cheapen you to buying them, even though they're not cheap, but they're indirectly destroying us. I will finish this section with this. You're trying to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. If you weigh 150 pounds, then you want to get 150 grams of protein. To give you an idea, a piece of chicken is about 30 to 40 grams of protein. So that means you need to eat six chicken breasts a day to get to that, or at least 5, depending on your weight. That's very, very difficult to do. Most people do not hit enough protein. Some people aren't even eating more than 50 or 60 grams of protein a day. That's not enough. If you will not get fat on high protein sources, it's not possible, and you will be fuller longer. So increase your protein intake in your diet. All right, number 3. Now this is more of a generalization because I could do this for 3 hours and probably list all the different things that you should avoid. But my main summary for this section is avoid inflammatory foods. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, there's 4 subsections to this. And in my opinion, the most potent and important is gluten. Gluten is a molecule that's found in many, many different things. Wheat, rye, oats, barley, beer. You can see it in chips and in cookies and pastas and soups and your salad dressings and like potato chips and processed foods, processed lunch meats. And part of the problem is that the gluten molecule in the United States is no longer recognizable compared to, say, 30 or 40 years ago. It's been so genetically modified, our body has no idea what to do with it, and it's really, really inflammatory. Compare this to, say, somewhere in Europe, say Italy. You can go to Italy and eat all the pasta you want, and you're not going to gain a whole lot of weight. Why? Because it's clean, it's fresh, and it's not super processed, and it doesn't have American gluten. So if I buy pasta from the store, I'm getting an Italian-made pasta that I don't have to worry about gluten. It's literally a choice between this one and this one. Now, the issue with gluten is that it causes this massive spike in inflammation. And a lot of us feel, well, why am I in pain? Why do I gain so much weight after eating so little? It's not because you ate a lot of food. It's what the food is made out of or no longer made out of. A lot of it is nutrient poor. They're not nutrient dense anymore. You want to go back to whole foods, not the store, the actual food. Now, it's easier nowadays, more than ever, to get gluten-free. And while you may not truly be gluten allergic, it is in your best interest to avoid gluten, especially in America. And it's nowadays you can eat things like quinoa, rice, different types of gluten-free flours that will announce it on there. Fruits and vegetables they do not have any gluten. Eggs, beans, nuts, and legumes, they're all gluten-free. If you're drinking alcohol, it becomes a little challenging. You can't pretty much drink any beer because it has gluten in it. And then if you're drinking a different type of alcohol, then you're probably loading up on sugars. So it's a little tricky to maintain a healthy diet and drink alcohol because you're going to have to pick your poison within that. So at the minimum, we're going to limit our alcohol intake. The second inflammatory department that I want to talk about is dairy. Now, dairy is not what it used to be. The same cows that are getting slaughtered for beef that are modified and loaded with antibiotics, unfortunately, that applies to their milk too. Now, there's 2 types of proteins within milk. There's what we call an A1 protein and then there's an A2 protein. The A2 is good. It has no issues. That's usually the casein protein. The A1, unfortunately, causes a lot of inflammation. And while you might not be lactose intolerant, depending on your race, it usually correlates with race. Most white people are not. But if you're of colored descent, unfortunately, you might be. And you'll know immediately after eating something that has a lot of lactose in it, whether or not it agrees with your stomach. But even if it does agree with your stomach, that doesn't mean it's not messing with other stuff. Now, it's very difficult to find raw milk. You can find it, but sometimes you literally have to sign a waiver to justify it, to give you an idea. So, the modified food industry said, all right, well, we're going to take advantage of people don't want to drink dairy. So we're going to make all these other types of milk. So you have oat milk, which is not really made out of oats, but it's quite inflammatory as well. It's a bunch of seed oils and processed stuff. Soy milk has a little bit of an estrogen issue with it. Almond milk, you think it would be ideal, but it's not actually the cleanest. And even rice milk. If you have a choice, this is what I choose, it's coconut milk. It tastes the closest to regular cow's milk, but is much, much cleaner and healthier for you. I personally buy mine in the refrigerated section at the grocery store because that's the way I like to buy it. You can buy it in a box, but I think that's kind of weird. But in general, dairy is really pro-inflammatory. And when I removed yogurt from my diet, and I love yogurt, I felt less bloated and less inflamed. Yogurt, for the most part, has really good high concentrations of protein. So you kind of have to pick your poison. Cottage cheese is really high in protein as well. And for the most part, it tastes really good. So you kind of have to pick your poison. But if you had a choice, we're going to eliminate dairy or at least remove a lot of it. The third section has becoming a very popular topic over the past year or so, and that's seed oils. What are seed oils? These are actually modified oils that were originally discovered and really funded by John D. Rockefeller. And as a result, he said, I can make money off this. This oil is garbage. It should be thrown away. It's literally a byproduct. But they said, well, we can modify this and make it so that you can eat it. The problem is this is not safe for you. This is a huge source of inflammation in the body. And every restaurant you go to, unless specified, uses some type of oil that is pro-inflammatory. So the most common is canola oil or corn oil or cottonseed oil or soybean oil. Now, all of these are what they traditionally used to cook with when you're not making the food yourself. Why? Because you can buy them very, very cheap. But unfortunately, that ends up becoming a problem in your system. The two safest forms that you can get away with are avocado oil for cooking and sauteing, and then olive oil for everything else. And ideally, a cold pressed, clean, preservative-free olive oil if you have a choice. Olive oil is fantastic for the body. Not usually meant sauteed because it doesn't hold its weight. That's where avocado oil comes in. But in general, that would be what your choices are. Avoid these seed oils. And I'll give you a little tip here. There is an app on your phone that I've downloaded. There's a free version and there's a paid version. It's called Seed Oil Scout. Now, I live in Miami, and it has, I'd say, a third of the restaurants in Miami mapped out. Are they seed oil free? Are they seed oil friendly? Are they completely loaded with seed oils? And it's a simple color-coordinated chart, and it's fantastic. Check it out. It's worth it. There's no affiliation. I just like to share information when it's helpful. The last section for inflammation is pesticides. Now, you probably think, what are you talking about pesticides? I don't eat pesticides. Oh, yes, you do. Almost every food that you eat has some type of pesticide in it, whether it's glyphosate, whether it's any of the different toxic pesticides. The EWA, Environmental Working Agency, releases a list of the most loaded or has the highest percentage of pesticides for fruits and vegetables every year, and then they do the safest, 20 or 15. I did several episodes back. You can look at them for the last list. Now, many of these are loaded with pesticides, and even if you wash them, you can't get them off. They're made with it. They're inside of the actual fruit or vegetable. Now, there's certain foods. Avocado comes to mind. Corn actually comes to mind, that are very, very low in pesticides. So you don't have the same concern, and you have a lot less issues in the body. Now, ideally, you're buying organic fruit if you can afford it. They love to 30%, 50%, 100% more expensive, although it shouldn't be. There is still some pesticides in there, but they're a lot less, and they're a lot friendlier in your body. Still not perfect, but they're a lot less. So if you have a choice, we're going to go away from pesticides, and you're going to feel a lot better. Your gut's going to like you more. You're going to have a lot less issues with inflammation. You're going to have a lot less joint pain. Your heart's going to like you more. Your brain's going to like you more. You're going to be able to do a lot more exercise, and you're going to be able to lose weight easier because you have less inflammation in the body that's counterproductive. All right, the fourth recommendation to help fix your diet: stop drinking your calories. Now, I know this sounds funny, but most people should be eating about 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. Do you have any idea how many calories you're eating a day? Probably not. Unless you track your macros or your specific calories like I do, there's no way for you to know. And nowadays, they make it really easy. There's scannable options. There's pretty much everything has a food source on the back. So, you really want to stop eating and drinking wasted calories. You should be drinking super pure water, high quality water that is filtered, ideally avoiding plastic bottles. Why? Because all of these plastics that are covered in all of our fruits and vegetables and water and canned, even inside of our aluminum cans, are actually called xenografts, they're a modified form of a foreign object that our body sees as an estrogen. So that's why we're starting to see a conversion, or our daughters and young women in the American society, predominantly in America, are actually hitting puberty at earlier and earlier ages. We are hitting puberty 6 years now before we were in the 1900s. 6 years. The average age in America is 10 to 13. And a lot of that has to do with what we're eating. A lot of these things have estrogen in it. What do you think the estrogen is happening? It's causing all a weight gain. That's why women traditionally have more weight and more body fat than men, because of their estrogen. Now, the problem with it is all of these things are loaded with microplastics that lead to estrogen increase in your body. So when I say, hey, I'm drinking water from a pure source, ideally glass or stainless steel. I'm drinking a soda. Be careful with soda or pop, whatever you want to call it. If it's a traditional regular soda, it's loaded with sugar, sometimes often high fructose corn syrup. And that lining is also lined with plastic. It's a double-edged sword. Furthermore, if you go to a diet soda, now you're using a lot of these modified sweeteners that really, that's why it tastes so sweet, but it really causes issues in your digestive system. So it's very difficult to eat clean nowadays because everything has something wrong with it, especially in America. It takes hours for our body to process high fructose corn syrup. If you understood how long it would take you to break down all of the extra sugar and the modified sugar in that can of Coke, you would never drink it. Most of the juices that we have sugar added for our flavor. If you want real juice, get it that doesn't have any sugar. It will literally tell you on the back, Sugar added, X number. It should be 0 or very, very low. This also includes alcohol. Why? Because alcohol is calories. You have to pick your poison. You have to decide, do you want to drink the alcohol and the calories or that are useless and don't have any benefit at all? It's very hard to stay in elite shape or even good shape by drinking a lot of alcohol. Those calories are wasted. And you want to make that calorie, every single calorie in that body, fight for you, be productive for you. Because if not, what happens? It's like, well, you don't really need me, so you're going to store me. What happens? You get fatter. And now you start to develop more issues in your body. You get pre-diabetes, you get diabetes, you get blood pressure, you get metabolic syndrome, your pancreas starts struggling, you get pancreatic cancer, you have knee pain. Why? Because every additional pound of body weight on the abdomen is 4 pounds on the knee. If you have 25 pounds overweight, your knees are carrying an extra 100 pounds. Think about carrying a backpack with 100 pounds of weight on it. That's a lot of weight. And that's only 25 pounds. When you start comparing yourself to other people around you, you justify it. And while BMI is not an ideal way to evaluate your body system, especially for leaner people or people that are more muscular, in general, it does a great job. You should be in the 20 to 25, 28 range. You start getting over 30, unless you have a significant amount of muscle and are super lean, you're obese. And just because, oh, that guy or girl is bigger than me, you're justifying it. Okay, let's finish strong with the 5th recommendation for how to fix your diet. This is easier said than done, but you really, really need to eat more fruits and vegetables. Now, there's a glycemic index, which basically means when you eat something, how much your blood sugar goes up. There are low glycemic index foods. Certain foods that have that barely anything, the needle doesn't even move in the blood sugar. And this is what you want. Blood sugar is the death of us. Why? Pre-diabetes, diabetes, it causes brain issues. Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, in my opinion. Any forms of dementia. They are blood sugar issues. Keep your blood sugar in check. You will live a longer, healthier life, and your body will be happy with you. Let's target the low and talk about the low glycemic index foods. Broccoli, onion, hummus, mushrooms, lettuce. Very, very clean, safe foods that barely move the needle. You want to get full and not raise your blood sugar? Those are some of the foods you should target. The next level, still very low glycemic index, but a little bit more blood sugar raising. Lentils, cherries, dark chocolate that is over 70% cacao, walnuts, and grapefruits. Grapefruits actually have one of the lowest glycemic indexes for fruits. Very, very low. Now, the 30 to 50 range is still a good range. It goes out of 100. It's usually 0 to 100, and now they probably have a couple modifiers to go higher than 100. But strawberries are in this one. Apples, whole milk, natural yogurt, and oatmeal. Each of these are in that range. And now you start to get to the higher ranges that are going to really spike the blood sugar. That's your 50 to 70 and your 70 to 100. So your 50 to 70 is like your whole grain bread, brown rice, corn, ice cream. Bananas are actually on this section. And then the highest section, the one that's going to spike your blood sugar the highest, is white bread, donuts, white rice, surprisingly, watermelon. So overall, these are different things that you should be either targeting or avoiding depending on which part of the scale we're looking at. Now, I recommended it earlier. The EWA has a list of fruits and vegetables. They actually even have an app that I just discovered recently that's pretty good. But get the minerals and the vitamins from your food, not from an IV source or from a supplement. Now, I love my supplements, but you will never have the same quality of a vitamin in a pill or in an IV bag that you will from a food source. But if you destroy your gut with all of these inflammatory issues and products that I was talking about, you're not going to be able to absorb any of those vitamins and nutrients. That's part of the problem. That's why some people end up having to go to supplements or IVs, because their gut is so messed up they no longer absorb the beautiful vitamins and minerals that we actually end up needing to function. Our body is a combination of processes. This A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D, so on and so forth. Many of those processes require specific vitamins and minerals, potassium, sodium, so on and so forth. And if you don't have them, you cannot complete that process. So there's a backup, or the body has to go the long way and to create that product that it was trying to create, that it would have had a lot easier path if it had the vitamins and nutrients. In general, the goal of this list is to lower your risk of diabetes, lower your risk of metabolic syndrome, while optimizing your health with whole foods, including meat, fruits, vegetables, and minimally processed carbohydrates. You don't have to be keto. You don't have to be carnivore. You probably should be Mediterranean diet, but pick and choose your foods, logically. Be smart about it. If you can't read it, if it's modified this and added this and read number 5 this, it's probably not good for you. Figure out which products, which foods are healthy for you, and gravitate towards those. And then every once in a while, we'll eat this as a one-off snack. But avoid the garbage that we're feeding our children, that we're feeding ourselves, that these companies are destroying our health. This is the only way you're going to get your health and your body back. You cannot depend on a pill. The goal of the majority of those pills is to fix a single issue. But the body is complicated. We have over 100 medical specialties in medicine. The problem is each of them are like a horse with blinders on. They don't talk to each other. This doesn't talk to that. This doesn't correlate with that. But unfortunately, they do. That's not a realistic thing in the body. And as a result, you really need to go back to the basics. The most important thing you can do for your health, number 1 is fix your diet, and number 2 is exercise. That's it. Keep it simple. I hope you learned from this. We will see you next week. If you like this type of content, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Maybe share with one of your loved ones, and leave me a review if you wouldn't mind. If you found this helpful, I'd like to see your thoughts. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Take care.